people are affecting rural Missouri primarily, or what issues we can start actually discussing, which will bring out the vote and let them know that our issues are also their issues, and that we see them, we hear them, and we want to fight for them as well. Richard?
Yeah, there was a lot of political activation in the rural areas through opposition to the right to farm bill. It's still out there, and you know it encompasses urban areas too, the community gardening movement. I think that's something that we ought to be talking about.
For those of us who might not be as aware of what right to farm
maybe not that particular bill, but we should be talking about control of seed by Monsanto. Allowing our genetics to be copyrighted is, first of all, it's against the copyright laws at the very beginning to begin with. And if we allow private companies to control genetics and limit our seed supply, it's a horrific scene. That happened in India, and now what are they doing? They're saving their own seed and refusing to buy or use Monsanto stuff because they have these companies stole their heritage, and they're doing the same thing here too. I think it's a strong movement. I think it's a strong progressive movement. It's the right thing to do. A lot of people will recognize that, and it's a message I think that might penetrate.
Virgil?
Yeah. So Alex, I'm not a farmer or resident. I was the first in my family on either side to not be born and raised on a farm.
Oh,
and they've been in the Ozarks since the 1830s. So the first thing we need to understand is that only about 2% of the American people are currently engaged actively in farming. This is a tremendous change and transformation of the countryside. So rural Missourians and rural America are not just focused around issues of agriculture, although that's very important, because so many of the secondary and tertiary economic effects in those communities are related to agriculture. But they've been seriously affected by the offshoring of American manufacturing. You look at industries, shoe industry particularly, that provided a primary or secondary income to many rural southwest Missourians for decades. And then those factories were closed, and subsequent replacement industry has not been always available, which has led to, among other things, the growth of the underground economy based around drugs, which has unfortunately permeated rural Missouri as much as it has other states as well. So these issues are important, as well as the rise in industrial agriculture and the way in which concentrated animal husbandry practices have created additional environmental concerns in communities where once they were not particularly problematic, but having dairy operations with thousands of cows in a particular location as opposed to 100 produces effluent that simply can't be absorbed through our karst topography and through the available water resources. So all these issues interrelate, some of which are agricultural based, obviously, but some of which go well beyond the agricultural aspects of bathing boats.
I love your vocabulary. And I grew up in a small town of 1,100 people, and all the issues you stated are very real there, especially the drugs. There's not a lot to do, especially for younger individuals. When I was growing up, I'll admit that I touched a thing or two I probably ought not have. And the vast majority of individuals that I knew in that town also ended up touching things that they probably ought not have. And a lot of individuals that I, at different times, considered very close friends and like family have gone down a bad road because of that. With what you mentioned about manufacturing, how many of us know individuals who have had temp jobs in factories?
Oh, yeah. The big factories in Springfield now, all of them are temp jobs. And I and many others worked those factory jobs. We started when we were in our 20s and worked until I was 40-ish and then had another career. But we retired and have an okay retirement. And these young people today will not have that.
Just going off that, one friend in particular, back home, he's got a 2-year-old now, and he's been bouncing from temp job to temp job right before he's actually able to get any benefits out of his work. They lay him off time after time, and he'll end up making the rounds and end up back at a company that he was working for, and the exact same thing will happen to him time after time. And we need to be able to do something about that. I don't know what that is, but I want to let the person
Right
who's
to work
supposed to
is not
run
gonna
the
help
meeting
that.
run the meeting now. But I felt important for a little bit, and I liked that.
Thank you, Alex. Sorry about that. I got tied up downstairs. And if you went to the breakfast, I'm Bob Rubino. Sydney of Mayfield, who is the chair for the Rural Caucus, was not able to be here. Family issues, or I think her mother was having surgery or something, so she wasn't able to make it. She asked me to kind of sit in. I've actually been involved with the Rural Caucus previously when we were in Southwest Missouri here. I was actually the chair for the Rural Caucus for about 2 years. Right now, the Rural Caucus is making an effort to do something about getting messages out to those people that live out in the rural areas. How many of you, I know Jim does, who else lives in rural areas? Including me. I live in Christian County, which is Republican headquarters down there. And it's very tough down there because they don't really look at issues that we're concerned with. And one of the things I think that I would like to bring forward and offer suggestions, and I'll gladly take any other suggestions you might have as to how we can achieve the results of getting the rural people to open their minds a bit. Because you all well know that it seems like there's a big old lock on some people's minds out there, and they can't look beyond the ballot of whether or not there's an R or a D on behind the name. Real quick, I ran twice down in Christian County in rural areas, and there's actually 3 main things I've seen down there that vastly affect rural America, rural Missouri especially. First off is highways. The State Highway Department has made an effort when they build new highways or improve highways to bypass rural communities. And over again, I've seen rural communities dry up simply because of the way the State Highway Department, by the lack of the fact that the people that represent them have not spoken up and said, hey, look, you're killing my community. You drive down to Timberling City now, and all of a sudden you bypass Reed Springs. Reed Springs is drying up. There's been no effort to support the communities. You drive over to Crane, or Galena. Communities that were very vibrant one year for years and years and years, and now the State Highway Department took Highway 13 off of that and renamed it 413 and basically called it a scenic byway. Guess what? You can't give a house away in Crane and Galena now. One of the things I look at is the no cost or no low cost, what's called low cost or no cost school lunches for students, for children in elementary and high school. Can you imagine living in a community like Galena where 90% of the students that attend their school system end up on no cost or low cost lunches? That's telling you that community is failing. The same thing's going on in Crane right now.
And I might insert there, the Republicans have proposed a bill to take those free and reduce lunches away from students.
Yes. But if you've ever been to Crane, it's a beautiful little town. It's got the only trout stream that's self-reproducing in the state of Missouri. Wonderful town. If you've ever been down to the Broiler Fest. But the fact is everything is drying up down there. People are moving away from Crane. Crane is dying rapidly. That's simply because the state has taken the highways that provided transportation in and out of those communities, have taken them and taken away the effort to maintain them, and they will not upgrade them. And that's happening statewide. So that's one issue I think as the Rural Caucus we could hopefully look at and address. That's just one thing. And that's my opinion. Another thing is the expansion of Medicaid. This state has refused the money the federal government has offered to help us expand Medicaid. And what it's doing is destroying hospitals and health clinics in rural America.
How are we not winning that message right now?
You tell me. You tell me. One thing I think you have to understand.
Really, I don't understand how we can't win that message.
All I can say is, there again, it goes back to the fact that so many people have their minds locked. They won't stop to think about it. And it's just frustrating.
People don't understand Medicaid expansion. These people in the rural areas do not understand what it means. They think that, oh, we're going to increase the Medicaid, the people that are on Medicaid. And the philosophy is they can go get a job.
They have jobs. There's nothing
We
out
know
there.
that.
They don't know
It's the
that.
working poor that benefit from it.
Rural America keeps losing money.
Losing.
Well, I work in healthcare policy, and one of the things we try and do is...
You're the problem.
Yeah, we're the problem. Is we try and help states expand Medicaid, and like you said, 31 states have expanded. And one of the things that I think we found is that people do have a fundamental misperception of who is on Medicaid. And one of the things that we found powerful in defending the Affordable Care Act and defending Medicaid across the country is the value of personal stories and understanding that when you talk about $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid that they want to propose to the American Health Care Act, that's shifting the burden on states like Missouri. And what that does is, it's not only cuts to services, but it's also cuts to other things that they have to spend that money on. So then you're talking about education cuts. And really what we need to do is talk about the impact it has on everyday people's lives. I think people get hung up on the numbers a lot of times, and people can't really understand what that means. But when you talk about the fact that Medicaid means children, more than half of children in this state are covered under Medicaid.
Yes.
Nursing home care, almost 2/3 of nursing home care costs are paid by Medicaid. So it's talking about what that means for young people, what that means for our state seniors, and we've made progress in some conservative states. Kansas, of all places, almost passed Medicaid expansion in a year, where we're talking about dissolving the program in a lot of ways. So I think that there's progress to be made. I think it's important to talk about those personal stories and making sure that people understand that Medicaid isn't just for urban folk. It's not just for single mothers or people that have substance use disorders, things like that. But it's people all across the state, and it's working for us.
I have one comment I want to make before you go any further. Thank you, Stephen. One of the things that we need to understand, it's our tax money that goes to support this. That tax money comes back into your community. Those people that work in those hospitals and those health clinics and other jobs that are health related, they turn around and they spend that money in your community. And you know what that does? When they spend that money in your community, it generates more money, and it goes right back into there. It goes back into your pocket, because there's jobs there. There's things that get spent. They go to the grocery store, they go to the hardware store, they go to the car dealer. They're spending money in your community. Your tax dollars is actually helping grow your community and keep your community viable, which also means that your school district gets to stay viable. There's unbelievable amount of great result of that tax money that you've already paid the government coming back to support your community.
The problem is that a lot of people don't do their own research. They're brainwashed, by Fox News and the GOP. And the sad fact is that 500,000 people in Missouri don't have a high school diploma, so they're not education oriented.
And they're not going to get it as long as the school systems keep failing.
So it's hard to get people like that to do their own research.
I know. That's where, lady in the back.
We're all saying things that need to be done, but I think we're not saying what is hard to say, and we're going to have to do it. The part of the problem is a cultural one, and I'm not talking about anybody else. My family's been here since the 1830s. I'm an authentic hillbilly, folks. There is a stigma attached to Medicaid, and we didn't put it there, and the people who are getting it don't deserve that stigma, but we have got to go erase that stigma before we can actually talk in the communities about Medicaid.
And I feel like we should hang that on the Republicans who are blocking this.
Yes.
Because the results of this is death. I mean, the results of this is deprivation. And many of the folks who use Medicaid are the same very constituents of these Republicans.
Now,
and we need to be
now,
aggressive.
listen what's being said here, because you want to take this information, and if you go back to your community, and if you happen to belong to a club out there, or belong to a group, or you go out and sit and drink coffee in the morning at the local McDonald's or whatever else you have out there, these are the talking points that you need to remember to pass out. That's the only way we're going to end up changing the thought processes of these people, is when you give them information that they can sit there and think about and go, God, you're right.
Yeah.
Virgil than you.
Well, the great unspoken reality of Medicaid is the growth that's occurring in Medicaid is occurring because of baby boomers who are in nursing homes. The money that Medicaid expends for mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandparents is the one that we never talk about. We have entire industries within the legal field now that qualify persons for Medicaid when they go for long-term care. Middle-class people who are able to transfer their assets in such a way that they qualify. And this is where the huge growth is going to occur. So politically, there are aspects of this that should be beneficial in making this argument about the virtues of the Medicaid program, per se, because it is one that's largely benefiting, at this point in time, boomers and those slightly older.
Yes. So,
After you, the gentleman in the back.
well, no, I'm going to,
Just you and the gentleman in the back.
right here.
I was a caseworker for 32 years. Learning the con of applying for assistance is one of the biggest underbelly issues and the misconceptions that you have to con the system. The encouragement of not being married, that way you don't pull in a spouse. The stating that you don't know who the father is to keep responsibility, you know, to make yourself eligible and keep somebody else out. There's a whole mindset of misinformation on how you have to manipulate to get benefits. And the second thing I wanted to mention, 8 years ago, with every single application you did, you had to offer the opportunity to vote. And the number one refusal to register to vote was, I can be called up for jury duty. Yes.
That's been changed.
But that is the number one,
They don't know that.
and there was a group, they look at each other and they don't know. No, I can't be
understand.
called up for jury.
I would love to be called up for jury duty. I've been on the rolls for, gee, I hate to think how many years, 40, 50 years. I've never been called for jury duty. I'd love to do it. But, yes, sir, in the back.
Basically we're talking about the expansion of Medicaid and all of that comes with it. I get to touch both ends. I basically manage a shift out at a company in the Industrial Park, Buckhorn, and the vast majority of my employees are on that margin. And so whenever they're talking about their health care, they can access some of our company health care, okay? But just by basic economics, anywhere from a third to half of my shift is going to be temp employees who are going to be in our system somewhere or another. They're either going to access it through Medicaid or they're going to access it through walking into an ER.
I wrote an editorial a number of years ago in regard to both Medicaid and Medicare, and it was over the issue about who actually benefits from the fraud that exists. And because everybody thinks that there's a whole lot of fraud in Medicaid and Medicare, there's not.
No.
The patients that receive the benefits are not getting money. If you ever look at and take the time to examine, the biggest fraud occurs, and Kansas City started an article on this years ago. At that time, it was like 2005, whatever this article. At that time, they estimated the fraud of just simply Medicaid was over $560 million a year. And the finger pointed to the healthcare providers. Even our governor at that time, Matt Blunt, said the problem is not the recipients, it's the healthcare providers. We have no mechanism in either the federal government or the state government to inspect how that money is being used. You got to remember, I was in management for a number of years. The one thing that we always used to say, inspect what somebody is doing and they will respect their job. And you go, well, that's awful true. But the fact is that people want to know, if you're doing a job, they want whoever your boss is to know that they respect what you're doing because they see what your job is. And what I'm suggesting is that the first thing that got cut in regard to Medicare and Medicaid was the fact that they did away with those people that would actually look to see how the money was being spent. And all that happens is you have this huge story everybody always has about all the abuse that occurs in Medicaid and Medicare. Well, because there's nobody there to see what actually is how it's being spent. So there's nobody to challenge them on that. So, just a bit of a comment. Yes?
I have a question. There's a transitional plan where somebody would go become employed full-time, that they could remain on transitional Medicaid for 6 months to get settled. Oftentimes, most times, that 6 months cutoff date does not match open enrollment time for insurance, so they're not able to transition from Medicaid to their employer's insurance.
Okay.
Does that need to be addressed?
Sounds like it does to me. Have you talked to your state representative?
No.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do? They're the ones that's making. You need to educate them.
Well, this would be working with the insurance company, saying that somebody is transitioning off Medicaid because they're.
Then I'm only suggesting that we need to push forward getting our legislators and congressmen aware of what their responsibilities should be. Point out to them, they have all this information coming to them, and they really filter out most of it, except for those people that really they want to hear.
So that's why a lot of employees quit after 6 months.
Because then they don't.
Because they've lost their Medicaid and they can't get on their employer's insurance for another 4 months or something.
I mean, so much seems to be cultural in educating folks in the field and legislators themselves on the salient facts, like you suggest, that fraud actually is very little. We're dealing with a cultural problem. The cultural problem is in the field, but also in the legislature. I mean, people are dying up to 13 years younger for lack of health care. You add up those years over the thousands of people, we're talking about thousands of years of lives. And rubbing legislators' nose in that perhaps might work, I don't know. But ultimately, there's a human cost in that, and these guys are elected, the Republican caucus, and getting away with murder. That's pretty rough language, you know, but that's ultimately what's happening. So my question is about messaging and changing the culture, because ultimately that seems to be what's at play.
And real quick, answer that. It still goes back to you spreading the word. I'm sorry, you are our most valuable spokesman. Is getting out there and letting your friends know, letting people you know, making an effort to get out there and talk to them. Write an editorial. Let your state representative or state senator or congressman know, or your U.S. senator.
The very first things I learned in Poli Sci 101 was that the majority of political action done in the United States is done through just conversations back and forth, and it is a powerful, powerful tool we have, just being able to talk to each other.
How many times people say, well, what good is it for me to talk about it? Nobody's going to do anything. The problem is that might come up to solve the problem. You've got to get out there and speak.
And can't sit here as a Democrat and be talking about health care and not say we have to push for a single-payer health system. We have to. There's no choice in the matter. We've got to do that. That has to be our first bullet out of the gun. I think one of the things that the Democrats continually do wrong is they rely on facts and figures.
Well, Richard, I'm not disputing that, but I've got to tell you this.
But I'm just telling people how to get messaging done that's going to be effective.
But we got to have Democrats get elected into positions.
I hear what you're saying, but first off, you have to relate it to an individual. My brother-in-law died for his ideology because he was hardcore conservative. He's always voted Republican. He always worked hard all of his life. But guess what? He wound up being unemployed when the factory closed. He was too old to get another job, so he winds up on unemployment, and it gets extended another year. It doesn't get extended again, and guess what? He's living in a house with no water, no heat, and
still voting Republican.
And he was voting Republican, yes. And he had an episode in public where he literally fell off. He had some kind of medical episode. He refused medical treatment because he didn't have any health insurance. Okay, so you have to tell messages that get to the heart like that. You have to recognize that everybody out there has a relative who, the nursing home, okay, great, we did all this stuff, we managed to save our assets. The nursing home was paid for by the state, but at the end of the day, the state says, okay, well, she still has these assets, so we're going to take these. And so what you do is you wind up living your entire life, building something for your children and your future. This is the real estate tax. This is the real one. And what happens is the state seizes any assets that are left that you didn't manage to hide, that you can't hide, and then your family is left with nothing. There's
Richard,
no
Rich, I only have one comment. You're just not rich enough. You're like the rest of us. One last comment, then we're going to move on.
I used to be administrator at a senior center in Greene County.
Okay.
And I went on senior citizens that have dealing with end-of-life issues, extremely ill, like you were talking about, who'd worked their whole life, and I would go to them and I would say, the state of Missouri and the county have these services available to you, and they would do that. They would say, oh, I don't want to take charity. I don't want to do that, and I would have to beg them, but the best thing I found was repackage it. I would say to them, you are a citizen of this state, a citizen of this country, you fought in World War II, you deserve, you earned this. This isn't charity, this is a right as a citizen. And so let me thank you, let this generation allow us to repay you by taking care of you at the end of your life. I think we need to do some basic things. Go back to Citizenship 101. We don't owe the government anything. We hire them. They work for us. Let's go back and teach people. You're not getting charity. You're getting repaid for all that you're giving to the government.
Your tax money. You've already paid. Over and over again, I keep hearing. I'm going to make one quick comment here. I want to say this. Over and over again, I hear the Republicans talking about turning it over to the charitable groups and let them pay for it. And that's not going to work because they get to select who they want to support. Okay. One other thing I'd like to say, broadband. How many of you live in, have broadband, have internet service? Hands? I want to see hands. How many of you don't have it?
Depends on what you mean.
Internet, I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about microwave or whatever. I'm talking about actually having cable come to your house that provides you with internet service.
Wireless broadband.
Wireless broadband. Well, that's wire. That's.
There's wireless broadband. There's also I get my internet service through my cell phone provider.
Okay.
And
but see, that's wireless. I'm talking about wired to your house, where it's a lot cheaper, and a lot more consistent.
That's not going to happen in rural area. The technology, because the technology is changing, it's not even practical to run a wire to a house anymore. It's all going to be wireless. So it's just a matter of what wireless is,
already one company in my area.
Competition, whether or not we can get broadband service that's fast enough and at a cost.
So you're talking about integrating rural areas into high-speed internet, digital services.
Yes.
And a lot of countries have leapfrogged over the hard wire into wireless and other technologies, but that's essentially the issue, is connecting rural areas to the digital economy, the digital environment.
I agree with you there, yes, but it's not going to happen wired.
And the reason it's not going to happen? I had a group out in Christian County one time. We have a number of housing developments out there with multi-million-dollar houses, and we got together as a group because they didn't have internet service. They couldn't get it. It's controlled by the internet provider, the backbone provider, whether it be Suddenlink or Uverse or Mediacom, as to where they decide where they want to run their cable to. Now, the only thing the government does right now, federal government has an effort underway to have, and they're providing money to the states to go ahead and have schools and medical facilities connected onto the high-speed internet. They are providing the cable. But you can't, right now, our state representatives are doing nothing to address this. And in fact, we had a meeting, well, let me finish. I had a meeting at the time with Jay Lawson, who's my senator. And he basically told these people, and these are pretty wealthy people, they told them, the state's not going to do anything. We're not going to do anything. You got to take it up. I had two people that actually, one of them actually owned a installer of fiber optic. His business, he did not have fiber optic at his facility. He was just down about 400 or 500 yards off the highway where the backbone was at. He told the company, hey, I've got the cable, I got the people, we actually do this. Let me hook into the backbone for my business. You know what they told him? No. Not a bit. Unless we put it in, we don't care. And he said, hey, I'm willing to put it in. So that's the way they control it. Yes, Virgil?
Well, Bob, actually the legislature is moving something. In our state and elsewhere, they're explicitly intervening to prohibit competition from private companies. They are explicitly prohibiting